at this juncture, being 1 year old, exactly this month, is that we see the need for someone who can bring change to this country, whether as a president or as a participant in government. That is very critical. Running the country is one thing. Bringing change is another. Bringing change requires all of us, and we think we can play that role. That role was played in 2009 by someone who was not recognized at that time. It was played by Simba Makoni. He brought about the government of national unity. And we think we can bring that. Because at any given point, whether you get a majority of seats in parliament, whether you win outright as president, your government should be a government of national unity, either by the way of its composition or by the way it functions or operates, by the way it brings people together. Without having a government of national unity by design, it is very difficult because people will be fighting for that single position. Whereas for us, the purpose is not necessarily to govern this country. The purpose is to develop it. And it requires all of us, whether in opposition or in power. So our main objective at this juncture is to be able to bring about change to this country, either as the president of this country, in my case with NPC in power, or as an opposition party in government, not necessarily at the top, because it requires the cooperation of every Zimbabwean for any president to effectively govern and bring about development and change in this country.
Wilbert, thank you. Elizabeth.
Thank you so very much. So our political party, I think, is very different from most of the political parties. We believe at the core of everything, the citizens should direct the path that we choose as a government. So we have spent a lot of our time first focusing on citizens' engagement. I've traveled across the entire country. I've met citizens face to face. It's really been the focus of our party since the inception. We were formed on 29 May 2021, and our party, the United Zimbabwe Alliance, is really focused on inclusivity. So that's why the ideology of citizens' engagement being at the core of what we are working towards. We want to make sure that for the first time, Zimbabwean citizens have a voice. Zimbabwean citizens are able to actually direct the government. The individuals that represent us in parliament or at local government level should actually be accountable to the citizens. And this is something that we're not seeing anymore. The citizens are really, in most places, aren't even aware of their rights in terms of having that level of accountability with government. So our focus is inclusivity. We also are focusing on ensuring that there is electoral accountability, and we want to ensure that we are focusing on restoration of our country and reform. These are the areas that we are focusing on. We are also in the process right now of shaping a manifesto. Our party manifesto will be unveiled, and this is really where the message that we will be sharing with the Zimbabwean citizens. At the core of that is the ideas that we have collected from conversations, from our interactions with citizens across Zimbabwe.
Elizabeth, thank you. Linda, take it away.
Thank you. Labour Economists and African Democrats was formed on 10 April 2019. And our core mandate is to restore the dignity of all workers in Zimbabwe and to change the political trajectory in this country. When I speak about the political trajectory, we are speaking about the governance system, the judicial system, the education system, the religious system, etc., etc. When we speak about the system, we are talking about the heart of everything that happens in this country. Why do I say so, and why do we say so as a political party? We are in perpetual crisis because we adopted a system that we do not even understand in 1980 from the colonial regime. And 42 years after independence, we are still suffering from the same suppressive, repressive, and oppressive laws which do not resonate with the aspirations of the ordinary Zimbabwean. And that is very fundamental to us and very critical, which is one thing that has never been taken into account by everyone who has ever called themselves themselves opposition since the inception of the so-called opposition in our country. And as such, as Labour economists and African Democrats, we have refused to be called opposition because we view ourselves as the alternative, because we want to bring forth the alternative type of governance that will resonate with the ordinary Zimbabwean, with Africans at large. That is why we actually have African in our name. Why do we say that? Most African countries are suffering from the very same things that we are crying loud about here in Zimbabwe, because we have not been able as African people to define our own system, to define our own governance systems that actually work for us. I'll give an example. Day in and day out, vendors are chased in the streets of Harare, in the streets of Bulawayo, in the streets of Umutare. Why are they being chased off? Because of bylaws that were maybe enacted in 1974, when the white people did not want black people selling in the streets. But we're in a different scenario where the population has bulged, where we've got very high levels of unemployment, and everyone needs to sustain their livelihoods. The right to work is a fundamental human right, which is the core of our existence. We want to protect the rights of everyone who is working and to ensure that workers are treated with dignity in this country and will be able to sustain their livelihoods and to ensure sustainable human development and sustainable economic growth.
Linda, thank you very much. Now, of course, this show is brought to you by the Election Resource Center. Now, moving on to our first question this evening. The Zimbabwean economy has operated suboptimally for perhaps 2 decades on end. The question then would be, what are you bringing to the table in reframing that narrative? Elizabeth.
So I think ultimately part of what we need to look at as a country is what has caused us to be in the situation that we're in today. We have a government which really is not focused on the development of our industrial sector. We have a government which is known to be compromising in terms of its policies on a daily basis. You wake up and you find that fiscal policies have changed, for example. I'll give an example. I'm in the tourism industry. 1 minute you're allowed to keep the US dollar currency that you're earning from your tourists. The next day you're told that a portion of that has to automatically be changed to RTGS. So the policies literally shift and change continuously. So from an investment standpoint, when people look at Zimbabwe, when we are looking and saying, where can we put our resources? You're not sure about the outcome, about really the viability of the business sector, the business investments that you're making. I think also to a certain extent we are lacking in terms of the support that we give to entrepreneurs in this country. I think to a large extent the government wants to be in the middle of a lot of the activities that are taking place rather than really getting out of the way. We have so much bureaucracy, so many hurdles to get through when you try to achieve anything in this country. And so the government needs to step out of the way and allow innovators, allow people who have good ideas to shape the business sector by coming to the fore with solutions, whether it's from an infrastructure perspective, transport, the financial sector, all of the various aspects of what it takes to build a robust economy. People need to have confidence in our country. They need to have confidence that Zimbabwe is a safe place to put your efforts, and therefore, we will not find ourselves in a situation where we have a stable economy, a reduction in inflation until really the policy framework that we're living and operating in is changed.
Right, Linda, over to you.
Okay, first and foremost, I think one of the things that a lead government will do will actually be to remove the USD for all domestic transactions. A lot of people don't quite understand this, but as long as you're not using your own currency, you're shooting yourselves in the foot. Zimbabwe has been under sanctions for about 20 years now, and we are still using the sanction as currency that they can manipulate at any time. And when there is international manipulation, naturally a fragile state will evolve. And that is the state we're in right now. But because everyone has become so accustomed to thinking that we can actually thrive using the US dollar, we keep on swimming in the same dark, murky waters. The Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, have been responsible for the crisis that we face to date in Zimbabwe. They gave us economic policies that they knew did not work in African states. For example, ESAP. It destroyed our economy. But when we want to interrogate things in our country, we want to put on partisan lens. We don't want to look at how the multilateral systems and globalization actually affected the economy of Zimbabwe. We don't want to also interrogate how sanctions also affected the economy of Zimbabwe. We have become people who are accustomed to consuming so much propaganda that we make it a reality and want to disconnect from the realities that actually destroyed our economy. Secondly, we will definitely need a stable political environment because it is a prerequisite for economic development. As long as we do not have a stable political economy and we always have people crying about illegitimacy, we're not doing any justice for the people who actually come out to cast their vote. So what we need is we need to create a conducive macroeconomic environment that does not scare away capital flight. We need to ensure that we ease the business environment, the ease of doing business. Create special economic zones.
Now, we'll come back to the issue of the ease of doing business. I will relay this to you, Wilbert, to elucidate on your strategy of bringing Zimbabwe's economy back into the game.
Mabunda, thank you very much. You know, the way we see things is kind of different from what I've heard over the years. We can talk about policy, we can talk about automation, we can talk how we can improve, how we can do things easily and so forth. You know, when you have got a system, a manual system, that is not done properly. You can bring computers. You can bring all the new machinery to make it efficient. But what you are doing is automating the mess. When you automate the mess, you increase the downfall. Things go down faster. That's what we are doing. You see, our biggest problem, what we see is the National People's Congress. By the way, our philosophy is Ubuntu. And Ubuntu for us is senior to democracy. It's about respect. And without Ubuntu, you cannot talk about democracy. Without development, without boundaries, you cannot talk about development in this country. And what we think went wrong, it went wrong in 1980. Things appeared to be doing very well because we were using infrastructure that existed before independence. And when I say infrastructure, I'm talking about our industries and so forth. They are right when they talk about industry. But which industry are we talking about? I came to Harare for the first time around that time. And I saw Willowville industries in existence. It has not expanded. I saw Workington. I saw Granite Site. I saw Chitungwiza. I saw Masasa. There has not been an expansion. We have seen an increase in the number of residential areas. Budiriro grew. Part of Greenville grew, Churu Farm grew. And there are many you can talk about, and this is the same in every city in this country. In other words, if we live in this room, but the population is increasing, and we don't create new areas, both physical space and opportunity space, we don't create new ones, you don't grow. We have to start with, we have not even developed new areas of industrial production. We have not. There is no new area. The areas that we see today are the same areas that existed in 1980. So the people that we are calling entrepreneurs today are entrepreneurs who are going into space that was occupied by the white people in 1980. And when they left, they entered. That does not increase capacity. In other words, in terms of operating space, we're still operating from the same space that existed in 1980. That does not increase production. In terms of entrepreneurs that are coming, they are occupying space that was occupied for physical space, and both in terms of business space. Besides the Econet, the rest of the industries that exist are replacing industries that existed before in terms of, both in terms of space that they occupy and in terms of capacity. So that is where our problems begin.
Right.
You can bring regulation, you can bring whatever you have, but when you don't increase the capacity to produce, you will not get entrepreneurs. Even
Right.
our most
just to jump in there, Wilbert, I'm going to ask that we keep our responses shorter, as we have different and multiple.
maybe indicate the time, like 2 minutes is past, 3 minutes is past, and so forth.
Sure. So if we can keep that perhaps to a minute and a half, that would be good, so that we crunch the various aspects that we need to actually articulate and have covered in this particular conversation. Perhaps moving on then to our next subject, the issue of Zimbabwe's ease of doing business. Zimbabwe is ranked 140 out of 190. Zimbabwe's foreign direct investment inflows have been perhaps over the past 4 or 5 years on a declining trajectory. What then is the solution from your perspective?
There must be business being done in the first place. We are doing transactions in this country. That's not business. When you are trying to manage transactions, that's what I call automating the mess. Whatever system you put in place, the president has introduced, remember when he came in, he talked about that. That's what I meant by automating the mess. You can bring computers. As long as there is nothing to automate, you want to move forward. As long as the system is a mess, you can't automate it, because you simply increase the downfall. So you can't talk about ease of doing business when there is no business in the reality that is to be done. When you are doing the same business in 1980, all you are doing is rushing to the same opportunity that existed then. I am saying we need to expand that. When we came in, we should have said this is our new industrial area. I'm not talking about new industries, new industrial areas for Harare, so that entrepreneurs we don't.
We do.
No, please don't come in. Let me finish.
If you may just let him continue as you
We
round
don't
up.
have enough. What I'm talking about, a new industrial area. We should have opened up a new area, completely different from Willow. We have had new industries,
Right, so-
filling in gaps. Let's say there were stands that existed before 1980, and you were coming in to buy a stand and infill. Yes, that has existed.
The gospel, according to you, is expansion and the exploration of new avenues.
No, creating, not expansion, but creating opportunities for Africans to do business.
Fair enough. Elizabeth, FDI inflows have been declining. At the same time, Zimbabwe is ranked 140 out of 190 on the ease of doing business index. What's the panacea?
The biggest challenge we have in Zimbabwe is you can't have a country where when you want to come and invest, you've got a few $1 million, you want to bring it in the country, you have to start by sitting down with the highest office in the country. That is not the way to do business. There should not be any government intervention when it comes to investment in this country. People should be allowed to go and invest in industries. The other issue we have right now in Zimbabwe is that we are losing our human capital. So when you think about the universities or the academic institutions we have in Zimbabwe, most of the academics themselves, the educators, are fleeing this country because it's not an environment that you can survive in. Like, I mean, literally the money they're making is not enough to keep them here. So they're trying to leave, going out of the borders. So now you don't have a workforce, a viable workforce that's being educated properly. So we need to look at what is causing our citizens to leave this country, because no industry is going to blossom in this country if we don't have a viable workforce. We've got to invest in education. We've got to invest in R&D, or research and development. We've got to actually, as a government, start thinking about ways to create that environment that is more conducive. So rather than being the gatekeepers of industry, government should be setting up institutions that ensure the success of industry or of investors that come into our country.
Thank you. Linda, how do we bring back Zimbabwe into the game against the pretext of its ranking on the ease of doing business and the FDI?
Firstly, I should say I'm on record being against Zimbabwe being open for business for foreigners. Zimbabwe should be open for business first for the Zimbabwean. You will find that terms to do business for the local and native Zimbabwean are way different from the foreigner. And that is a real cause of concern, because Zimbabwe belongs to Zimbabweans, not the Chinese, not the Russians, or any other nationality. I think if we start dealing with that, will be able to ensure that wealth creation becomes a reality for the native Zimbabwean. The biggest problem we have in this country is corruption. When an investor comes from outside the country, they have to be paying a lot of bribes to be able to see different people who can connect them for them to have their deal done. We've got too much bureaucracy, too much red tape, and at the end of the day, we end up losing a lot. But I feel that a lead government is supposed and will, according to the lead ideology, we do have an ideology anyway, we want to ensure that every Zimbabwean has got equal opportunities to create wealth, equal opportunities to run businesses, to run industries, to run mines, whatever, you name it. Because I don't believe that we should be having any Zimbabwean who's poor in this country to date. I always give an example of the missing $15 billion, whether it existed or not. But when you look at the amount that was said to have disappeared from the diamonds, it could have saved 8 million families. Each family could have gotten at least $1,000 US, and the government could have been left with about $7 million. But we've got a type of politics in this country where we do not want to share the national resources. It is too elitist, too exclusionary, and it does not take into consideration the livelihoods of the people of this country. And that is a real cause of concern. Nyika haivakwi nevanhu vane zhara. Nyika inovakwa nevene vakaguta. So that is very important going forward. We need to ensure that every worker in this country is properly remunerated and every person has got access to create wealth and to do business.
Right. Now, moving on to another subject, the government of Zimbabwe has tabled a plan to compensate the white farmers, specifically on the improvements that they made to the pieces of land. What is your stance, Elizabeth, on that particular subject?
Well, I think, isn't it it's not the responsibility of the Zimbabwean government. Wasn't there an agreement already in place for compensation of the white farmers? I'm not going to preempt. We've got a manifesto that we will be launching in a few days. We will be addressing this very issue.
The electorate is watching.
I understand.
They would want to hear your stance where that subject is concerned.
I understand. As I've said, I don't believe it's the Zimbabwean government whose responsibility is to compensate the white farmers.
Whose responsibility is it?
We will be addressing all of this in our manifesto in just a few days. I'm not going to preempt that.
But this is a public platform. The electorate is watching. They're expecting a response
I've got
from you.
that even, and like I said, I'll be sharing this in great detail. The difference, again, between us and other political parties is the solutions and the ideas that we will be bringing. Would you mind giving us
perhaps a summary?
Well, I believe that the land within our country should be for the people of Zimbabwe. It belongs to the people of Zimbabwe. The land reform situation was not handled very well. It really is something that has to be reviewed.
How should it have been handled, or how would you then move on from this point?
Well, certainly there should have been a much more fair and equitable distribution of land, and I think there were plans in place for that, but it went awry. There are facts and documented elements of this that we will be sharing in the very near future as a political party. And this is, again, part of the manifesto that we will be unveiling very soon.
Still on the subject, should there or should there not be compensation?
Look, you have to look at each scenario. Every single farmer's situation was different. Some people were removed from farms that they had bought, where they had title deeds. So we have to look at each and every scenario.
Linda, you chuckled when I brought up the subject. Your perspective?
I don't believe that there's any white farmer who should be compensated. Did they compensate our great-grandfathers and great-grandmothers that they took to Region 5? Because when you look at it, many Zimbabwean people are still suffering, living in places that are semi-arid where they were displaced.
There shouldn't be compensation, she says. Your take, Wilbert?
The government is negotiating to compensate white farmers for developments, not for the land. I have no problems with compensating white farmers for the developments that they made, but I don't think it should be full compensation, even for the developments. I'll give my perspective.
What then should be compensated for?
For the developments. Just your question says the government is negotiating to compensate for developments. So I'm saying yes, for development, but not for the land. Land reform is the best thing that can happen to any country. And land reform
never belonged to them.
is a continuous process. There is no president who will leave office without reforming the land, unless the economy is not developing. So for me, it was a natural process that was supposed to take place. We live in an international community on the global world. And
Wilbert, I'm going to have...
You are cutting me short after I speak, but everyone else went on for a long time.
I
But
was
if you want me
actually
to
cut
continue...
You may round up.
So you should also
we need to
accept
take
to
a
be cut
breather.
off.
Yeah,
Because
because I
was cut off.
answered your question directly, you are giving me less time. Let me try to explain some of these things. You see, we don't live in a vacuum. Those guys came here, and some of them did business honestly. They bought land from the Queen. It's the Queen who took our land.
But it's
so I
not
wanted
their
to,
land.
please,
It's
can we,
ours.
can we?
If you may let him
Yeah.
proceed.
What I wanted to say, what we need to do to take on from where she did not complete, is that, yes, the government must compensate, but the money does not have to come from us. Because the agreement in 1980 provided for compensation by Britain. And I think if we are to follow a humane process, we can agree with the white farmers and take a document to the British and the international community to say, can you come in and compensate? Because it is in the Lancaster House Constitution that they were supposed to pay for it. So yes, they must be compensated, but not by the Zimbabwean taxpayers, because they already paid enough tax when they were displaced from their land, when they were dispossessed of a lot of things. But yes, because these are individuals who came 100 years after our colonization. Some of them had no relationship to the people who actually colonized us.
Right. You brought about the issue of the international relations and Zimbabwe's relationship perhaps with other countries.
In the Lancaster House, yes.
Let's talk about how that Zimbabwe has somewhat been isolated from the international community and has found it difficult to access international lines of credit. Of course, there would be a narrative behind that. What then would be the way out of this particular jigsaw puzzle, Linda?
I'm a radical. I'm a Pan-Africanist at heart. And I believe that multilateralism has actually failed many African states and not only Zimbabwe. We've been cornered into a corner where we are still managed by the West, indirectly or directly, through these multilateral institutions. And I'm unapologetic about that. We've got the African Union, which is fully funded by America. We've got the African Development Bank, fully funded by the US. Everything about Africa is funded by one Western country or Eastern country or the other. Wait, I'm
do you have
to
full
your
proof
question.
for that?
Yes, I do. I can even give it to you even after the show. You can even Google. Those are facts.
Proceed.
Yes.
Back to the subject.
Back to the subject is multilateralism is a farce. It benefits only the superpowers. And that is the reality.
And Google is
Maybe
your
right
source.
now, yes. Not only Google, I read a lot, I research, and I also did intelligence for your own information. So at the end of the day, we need to be clear about some things. I actually applaud BRICS.
What do you mean about intelligence?
I did intelligence. That's all I can say. So
The public would want to know to what extent, with who, where, how, when.
That is it.
Everyone does intelligence.
Yes.
Every subject.
There's
we
no
do
politician.
is
If there's any politician who did not study intelligence, then they are not fit to be a political person. World over.
Boxton.
Yes. So basically what I'm trying to say here is multilateralism has failed Africa, and that is the reality. Anyone who can want to argue with this, maybe they want to be funded by those Western or Eastern countries, but Africa needs to learn to stand on its own 2 feet. We've got enough mineral resources in this country to be able to determine the systems that we want. We've got enough resources in Southern Africa to become a powerful economic bloc. But what is lacking is unity of purpose within the leaders. There's too much elitism, greediness, corruption, etc., etc. If we want to stand firm as Africa, I know we will actually be able to deliver ourselves out of the doldrums that we are suffering from. I know a lot of people want to say we live in a global village, global this, global that, but Africa only has one permanent seat in the UN Security Council. But we are the largest when it comes to the number of countries that we represent. So you'll find that everywhere where Africa wants to fit in, we are disenfranchised. And we are busy saying we are isolated, we are what? What really have we benefited by the inclusion into Western affairs or Eastern affairs?
Right.
That is the conversation we should have with Africa.
Right, and I think you've made your point, Elizabeth.
Well, my sister Linda, I do agree with you with regards to Africa's capacity. I don't think that we are utilizing our own capacity. We are an incredibly wealthy continent. Zimbabwe itself is probably one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We probably are the backbone of why the United Kingdom is so wealthy today. A lot of our wealth has left our country. So that is one issue that we definitely need to, to focus on and collectively work on. I'm so serious about Pan-Africanism that I also am the CEO of the African Federation, a new organization which is focusing on really bringing solutions that are Africa-wide, and we want to utilize, even the influence of individuals who are outside of our borders. But that's another point altogether. As Zimbabwe, we are not paying our debts. So, if you look at, trying to establish rapport with the international community, when you don't even pay your debts, but you've got these extremely wealthy individuals within our country who are, optimizing or leveraging the resources of our country for just a few, for the benefit of just a few, it doesn't add up or it doesn't balance. So I do believe that Zimbabwe has the capacity within our own borders to become self-reliant. I do believe that we should be doing more in terms of developing industrial sectors for export, rather than us relying on individuals or organizations to come in and bolster our economy. So I think that even the debt that we have right now is nothing in comparison to the resources that are slipping out of our borders on a daily basis for the benefit of a few. So we've got a lot of problems that we need to work on, and this goes back to what I was saying about you can't have the highest officers sitting in the middle of any negotiation, any deal that's taking place within Zimbabwe. That is a short ticket for corruption. That is the reason why we have corruption throughout all of the institutions that we have in this country.
Wilbert, you may weigh in.
You talk about isolation, and you talk about the need for us, and that we've got the capacity to do what we want. I think that's a contradiction. If sanctions are working, which means we can't live in isolation, if they mean anything. I want to go back to what I was talking about, development without boundaries, and Ubuntu. Ubuntu is the same as Pan-Africanism. You see, the key is not so much whatever we are talking about. If we don't identify the problem, we'll never get the solution. I want to go back to what I said at the beginning. We did not create new industrial areas. Yes, we created new industries. So we did not increase our capacity to produce. We are producing at the moment at pre-1999 levels. That's when you go to any statistics, that's when we reached our maximum. I'm an engineer, I'm a banker, I'm a finance person. I'm also a soldier, I didn't go that much. We need to go back to the drawing board and say, what is it that we should do in order for us to get out of this system where we rely on others? For example, ISAP. ISAP was not brought on us by anyone. We requested for it. People can go back at that time. We requested for ISAP because we had seen it working. We thought it was working. And it caused a disaster. We need others, but we need ourselves more. That's why I'm saying let's increase our own capacity to produce by letting our entrepreneurs have places to work from. When you go to Glenview, when you go to anywhere, you see people welding on the verandas and so forth. To me, those are big business people. We have not found space because we have not created new areas to work from. We are still fighting for the same space that was held by the white men. If you go into town today, Barbers is divided into small cubicles so that we can fit, because the numbers have grown. Let's provide new areas where entrepreneurs can find space to operate, so that a new person with capacity to produce beer can compete with the Delta because he has got somewhere to work from.
Wilbert,
we have constricted our people to the same space.
I think you've made your point.
Yeah.
We can move on to the next subject. Now, Zimbabwe's political history, or should I say framework, has been dominated by pretty much two or three political parties, perhaps since independence, and perhaps two over the past 2 decades. The question is, what are you bringing to the table different from what we have seen already, Elizabeth?
I don't think that it really is relevant whether or not they've dominated for the past 40 years, 20 years, whatever the case may be. I don't think it really matters what has happened historically. I think in politics, would
be what then is the different?
Yes. What I'm bringing that's different. I think that the fact is that the citizens, like when you go to elections, it's a competition of ideas. It's the citizens having the option to understand and see and really envision the Zimbabwe that they want. And so up to this point, yes, there have been a few loud voices, or I guess largely represented political parties. However, there's not been that political party that people can say, that is really what I want to vote for. And so you see that a lot of people are now sitting back, hands folded, and saying, where is it going? At the end of the day, people have not had the confidence to look at a political party and say, that is our political party. The ideas that Uza is bringing in our party manifesto is what really the game changer will be. I'm going to keep referring to this because it is going to be what sets us apart from any other political party thus far. And it doesn't matter whether it's Nelson Chamisa's party or ZANU-PF Mnangagwa's party. This is going to be completely different because the citizens have shaped this agenda and the citizens are going to embrace it.
Now, Linda, what are you bringing to the party?
To the party or to Zimbabwe?
To Zimbabwe, to the platform, to the forum. This, of course, comes against the backdrop of you having actually contested in 2018. So the question is, we're in 2023, what then are you bringing onto the table?
Point of correction, in 2018, I was not running for presidency. I was the spokesperson of MDCT and I was running for a constituency. This is my first time running for presidency. And what we're bringing on the table as Labour Economists and African Democrats is a new political trajectory that will define a new governance system, a new system of doing things that is pro-Zimbabwean, where we are going to engage after elections and make sure that we dump and eradicate this governance system we adopted from the Smith regime and come up with a system that works for us as Zimbabweans. What we're bringing on the table is depolarization. Zimbabwe is a highly polarized and toxic political economy. And we've been working on that slowly but surely, even though we're insulted on a daily basis. But what we want is tolerance, unity in our diversity. We are bringing in decolonization of mindsets. I think currently to date, we are the only party in this country that is speaking truth to power, regardless of where you stand. When you will pinpoint you and say this and that you're doing wrongly. Things are supposed to be done this way. But the tragedy that we have in Zimbabwe is the big man syndrome, the demigodism type of politics, the populist politics, where we are looking at one figure and saying izinto zvinoita, or the chete chete mantra. We have never learned from the era that we did in the Mugabe regime that we cannot put all our eggs in one basket. We need a thriving multi-party democracy. We have also been pushing for a change of the electoral system since 2019. We want a proportional representation electoral system for all MPs like the one we are using in Senate. Why do we want that? Number one, it will help us achieve gender balance, which is enshrined in Section 17 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. Women are still structurally marginalized and systematically elbowed out from active political participation in this country. Secondly, proportional representation system will enable multiplicity and plurality of political parties. There will be no wasted votes, as every political party will be able to get into parliament considering the percentage that they were gathered at the election. Thirdly, it will help us to stop the polarity and toxicity, because every president of a political party, if they lose, they'll go into parliament. There'll be the no kudira jecha mantra, or I am not there. So we are pushing for that, and we continue pushing for that until we get to a stage where we have got an inclusive political system in this country.
Right. Linda, a reminder to keep our responses short. Wilbert, you may weigh in.
Represents inclusivity. And for us, Ubuntu is for development without boundaries. That's the starting point. We need to industrialize this country. Today, everything is made in Harare, very little in other towns. We created growth points in 1980, but they have not grown because we have kept shops. You don't create new wealth by shops. We need to make sure that every district produces something of its own. But what we are bringing as new is probably what they have referred to. Ubuntu is for respect, is for peace. We need to respect each other. I don't have to worry about President Mnangagwa. He's my president. I know I'm here because I think there are things that he could have done better. I don't have to worry about Chamis. And we think we should maintain peace and not talk about people, but talk about only the route that this country must take, so that we don't waste time talking about people, talking about what has been done wrong. We must talk about what we think we'll do right, because mchukudza akati kupisa imba yako akuwake yako. You can talk about what has been done wrong until you tell us what you are going to do right. I think two things have gone wrong in this country. The first thing was Mugabe stayed for too long, but I respect him. The second thing, we did not plan this country. I want to go back to this, because there is no way we could be occupying the same industrial space in 1980 when there were 500,000 people occupying it, and now we are 15 million. So that's where we went wrong. We can automate, we can do whatever, but if there is nothing to automate, we want to increase production.
Right. Let's move on to our next subject of discussion, which is the element of the political landscape that we've got in Zimbabwe. Is it conducive enough for free and fair elections? Elizabeth.
No, it's not. It's we all know. I think within our party, the UZA, party, we all know that going into this election, it's going to be a very uneven playing field. You look at the situation that we've just come through with the delimitation process. There are a lot of red flags there. I know there's been a lot of debate and deliberation about it, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but really we know that the constituents are not going to be given a fair playing field in terms of their vote. We also are looking at things like state media. We are not anticipating, or at least from what we have seen thus far, state media being able to give all political players the same equal access to airtime, to media. We also, as we look at things like the voters' roll.
If I may come in there, which political players, considering you are on this
this is you can say that, but honestly, if you look at we've been here for a year and a half. We were created 21 May 2021. I contested in the by-elections last year, and there was absolutely no fair coverage when it came to state media. Thank you very much for having us today. We're most grateful for that. But honestly, if I look at over the course of time, there's daily coverage.
Just to come in there, how did you fare in those particular
Let
elections?
me go back to first this election and what we're anticipating. To answer your first question, then I'll go back to that. We also are realizing as we look at this election that it's going to be very difficult for candidates to contest. When you look at the fees, the nomination fees that have been imposed on candidates, a presidential candidate paying $20,000 an MP paying $1,000 to be able to contest, that really takes away our rights as citizens to participate, as candidates, but also, the individuals who are wanting to support the candidates that they would maybe look to represent them in their constituents. In March 2022, when we contested, I want to go back to your question here. We were looking at this more from the perspective of wanting to understand the process. We had 4 candidates. They were in urban areas, but we had spent most of our time churning the ground in, my rural areas. Marua. You know, we were spending a lot of time in rural areas because we wanted to make sure that we were hearing from citizens from across the country. We didn't fare very well. Our candidates did not enter parliament, and as we would have hoped. But we learned a lot of lessons about what the process was like. And certainly when you go to a poll station and you find a Panakana Magetsi, you can't even, read the, the counts that you're trying to, to read, or, you're trying to go through this process of, really making sure that everything that you're doing is free and fair. It's not going to be an environment that's easy. So we are saying the voters must turn up in large numbers in order to ensure a win. I'm not trying to go over my time.
We will get over to that.
I've been adding time. That's how I discovered I'm getting the list. I'm
You're
looking at my phone. Yeah.
I'll relate to you. Take it away.
You see, there is never in any place in the world where the playing field is going to be even. But I think the capacity of a contestant and the ability of a contestant to do something is determined by the hardships that he goes through, by the terms that you negotiate. We are saying, despite the unlevelness of the playing field, we intend to do well. We intend to cause change. We intend to bring change. It will never be level, even if you wanted to. I know we can talk about reforms that we want and so forth. And I've always asked myself, if I get into power today, will I want to make these same reforms that we are asking for? And you get my point. I don't think it's the reform. It's also the way we work. We started our consultation for the formation of the National People's Congress on 5 February 2019. And we consulted for 3 years until we gathered on March 12, 2022, when I was appointed interim president. And our findings are very interesting. Is that political parties, opposition, are responsible for their own downfalls. And one of the things that they said is that they never come to the rural areas. I had a typical example myself, where I contested as an independent in 2018, and I got 10,000 votes, just under that. And it was my first 70 days in politics. I'd never been in politics before that. So I discovered it's possible, provided you put your time. We need to give time to those people. We spend most of our time in Harare, we gather 100,000 people, and we think we have got voters. And when we lose, we think because we had 100,000 people in a stadium, someone cheated us. No, the people who come to see us are not necessarily our voters. They are coming to look for something else. So I think we need to change the way we do politics as opposition. I will send you that report we compose on why opposition parties are losing. People here are very intelligent, even those in rural areas. They can see through you. If you lie to them, they will see through you. If you promise them something that doesn't work, they will see through you. And they will vote. And when you go and try to buy them, no one can buy a voter. True. She gives them $10, I give you $10, I give you $20 or $10. You will decide which $10 is better. We must remove this element that people are coerced into voting for someone. That's why we are saying we will get to the people. We'll get out there into the rural areas. I'm not going to be worried about Harare because they can see my adverts every day. They can see me on TV. They can see me on social media, where I am not very much on social media. But we need to get to the rural areas to see that we can get real change.
Right. Linda, what is your position and what's your interpretation of the political landscape in Zimbabwe? Is it conducive enough for free and fair elections?
I actually fear that we're going to have the bloodiest election in 2023, which is worse than what happened in 2018. One of the biggest tragedies that we're currently having right now is everyone is just interested in the power and primitive accumulation of wealth. And this is the reality. Everyone is concerned about how they're positioning themselves. It's not about what they're going to do for the people. And that scares me a lot. When we look at the intra-party violence that is happening in different political parties right now, it's a cause of concern. That will escalate.
Just to come in there perhaps as follow-up, what then should be done to correct the situation that you are explaining?
What we are currently doing with other civic society organizations is we've been drafting a petition to the president of this country, which we're going to unveil soon, I think maybe next week, where we're raising concerns from the citizens. We're going to actually look for about 3 million signatures because we have done our background check. A lot of people in this country don't want elections. Every electoral cycle for them is traumatic. The forceful nature of our elections, how they're forced to close their businesses to attend rallies, how they're pushed to do things. A lot of things happen that are unrecorded during the election campaigning period. But I think there's a time that we need to sober up as Zimbabweans and say, are these elections working for us? Are they bringing out the leaders that they want, that represent the aspirations of the people? And I also believe that if we're given sufficient time as Zimbabwean people, we can sit down, what is it that we need to correct, and have a referendum and correct some of these things. What we are suffering from is trying to move into a system that
Linda,
we don't understand.
Just to come in there, we are almost out of time. Now I'll give each of you a chance to perhaps indicate in just 1 minute what it is that needs to be done as we head into elections. Linda.
What needs to be done is we need to find each other as political players, speak with one common voice, at least come with one national common vision, which every political party going to the election will say, this is what we want for Zimbabwe. I think it is important for us to put the needs of Zimbabwe first. We cannot continue fighting each other and killing people for political power. We need to put the interests of native Zimbabweans first. That is my part in short.
Thank you, Linda.
I agree, Linda, that we should be stopping this idea of fighting for democracy, because really democracy is there in Zimbabwe, but we need to pave the way for a democratic environment where we have politically plural space for conversation. But I really think that for the first time, I'm really frightened going into this election. The reason I'm frightened is because as a country in Zimbabwe, we are losing our land to foreigners. Across this country, people are exploiting our country. Wazukuru wangu, they will ask me, kuti gogo makaite, and they will ask you as well, kuti makaite, why did you not vote to change the current government and to ensure that there is a government that protects the interests of our people? And that is what we want to see done. We want voters to go out, register in numbers, make sure that you turn up to vote, and please, please, please make sure you defend the vote come election time, because this is the most critical election we have ever faced in this country.
Wilbert, in just 1 minute.
Everyone must adapt to a behavior that stops violence. We believe violence starts at the mouth, at our mouths. If you speak ill of someone, they will get angry. If you talk bad of another politician, they will get angry. Ubuntu says, let's respect each other. Let's not shout each other's names. Let's not shout at another political leader. Let's just state our objectives, our agenda, in the route that we want to go. I believe this election will not be as violent as the last one. I really believe so, and we must pray for it. Because if we follow our own ideology of Ubuntu, of peace, unity, and justice, where we don't shout at each other, where you don't speak ill of another leader, where you just focus on your own agenda as an individual, as a political party, we will have peace. For me, that's the starting point. It's Ubuntu. For development without boundaries, for health without boundaries, for services without boundaries, for peace without boundaries. It starts with justice. You cannot have anything else until you start with justice.
We are out of time. A big thank you to Elizabeth Valerio of the United Zimbabwe Alliance, Engineer Wilbert Mubaiwa of the National People's Congress, and Linda Masarira of the Labour Economists and African Democrats. Well, of course, this program was brought to you by the Election Resource Center. I'm Ibn Mabunda. Let them do what they do. When we do what we do, we mean business. Good evening.